What's going on, guys? This is VinylicPuma, back with another Borderlands 2 video for you guys, and with the new Commander Lilith DLC out, I figured it would be a good idea to revamp or update my top 10 best bosses to farm in Borderlands 2 video. Now, real quick, because we've got a lot of bosses to go over here, this video will include pretty much every boss type that's available in-game, whether it be mini-bosses like Scorch, main story bosses like the Warrior, or raid bosses like HYPERIUS. As far as rankings go, they will be based on the quality of the items that you can get, the ease of defeating the boss in question, and perhaps most importantly, the legendary and pearlescent drop rate for that boss. Also, and as one last thing before we start, definitely be sure to smash like on this video, and let's see if we can get this video to 10,000 likes. If we can reach that number, it would be amazing, so be sure to smash like on this video if it helped you out, and feel free to leave a comment on this video as well for a free flying car. But enough intro, let's get into the video starting with number 10, and that's going to be GETTLE and MOBLEY. While not quite of the caliber of some of the raid bosses or story bosses, it's still definitely worth completing Mordecai's The Good, the Bad, and the Mordecai side quest in order to get both GETTLE and MOBLEY to spawn in the dust. The main reason you're going to want to farm these guys is because GETTLE has a chance to drop the Lyuda, while MOBLEY has a chance to drop the Varuk. While the Varuk is a fairly average legendary assault rifle, the Lyuda is among one of the best legendaries in the game. This is partially because the Lyuda is based off of one of the best non-unique snipers in the game called the Droog, which has a high fire rate at the expense of some base damage. Unlike the Droog though, the Lyuda has improved critical hit bonus and has the ability for the initial projectile to split into 3 after a certain distance, effectively tripling the damage with proper distancing and practice. While this may only be our 10th entry, I'd say it's worth farming both of these mini-bosses just so you can have the chance of receiving a Lyuda. You're not going to be able to get GETTLE to rain legendaries or whatever, but it's definitely worth it to come here and get what is quite possibly the best sniper rifle in Borderlands 2. Number 9. The Bunker. Though the Bunker isn't as great of a boss to farm as it was before the release of the Lilith DLC, farming the Bunker is still worth it just to get a Sham Shield, which is one of the best absorption shields and one of the best defensive shields in the entire game. Beyond the Sham, the Bunker is the designated drop for the family-friendly SMG. It's a great source of some of Borderlands 2's best head customizations like Axton Space Knight, and you can also get a little bit of Eridium here as well. Though, I do think it's worth noting that when it comes to those head customizations, the drop rates are pretty low, so you may not want to specifically pursue these in order to keep your sanity. As for farming Bunker quickly, I'd recommend you do it on Zero. Bunker is very susceptible to Zero's bore skill, and if you place your shots like I'm doing here on video, you can effectively one-shot the Bunker, then wait for him to circle around the arena, where you can then shoot him again, and then just loot what he drops. You can also farm Bunker on other characters as well, as Bunker isn't really that hard. However, I would recommend Zero if you want to have the fastest method possible. In the end, make sure to farm the Bunker if you're looking for some great head customizations, if you want a Sham Shield, or if you want a family-friendly SMG. Number 8. The Handsome Sorcerer. Even though you could just farm the Warrior instead, farming the Handsome Sorcerer is better because he's a lot easier to access and just get to. That and farming the Handsome Sorcerer is a bit faster as well, since you don't have to wait for the Sorcerer to enter the lava pool and then re-emerge like you would for the Warrior. All you have to do is take out all 3 of the Handsome Sorcerer's forms, which is, again, nowhere near as annoying as it can be when you take on the Warrior and you have to deal with them diving into the lava pool. Now, the reason you would want to farm the Handsome Sorcerer is because both the Sorcerer and the Warrior share the same loot pool. This means that the Handsome Sorcerer is a great place to farm for a Flacker, Conference Call, Volcano, Impaler, and Leech. Of these 5, the Conference Call is arguably one of the best shotguns in the game and is highly recommended when going up against any enemy that's just really large. Aside from that, the Volcano is a pretty decent sniper for Axton, the Flacker is just a great shotgun to pair with toward rocket launchers, and the Impaler and Leech are okay, but could be skipped in my opinion. Now, I suppose it is worth mentioning that you can always farm the warrior instead if you want, and that might actually be a good idea if you're looking for Eridium specifically. However, I think you'll find that farming the handsome sorcerer is just a bit better and a little bit faster. So be sure to come here if you're looking for a conference call. Number 7. HYPERIUS the Invincible. Despite being the hardest raid boss on this list, HYPERIUS is still a pretty great boss to farm in this game. Like all of the Seraph Guardians, he's a potential source of Seraph Crystals, and he also drops what is quite possibly one of the strongest SMGs in the entire game, which is the Seraph Tattler SMG. In addition, another reason to farm HYPERIUS is because he's a decent source of Legendaries, and more specifically, HYPERIUS is a great source for the player to obtain the Norfleet, which is the best rocket launcher in the entire game. So while HYPERIUS may be difficult, it's definitely worth taking him on to get access to what are quite possibly two of the best weapons in Borderlands 2. As far as strategy goes for taking down this boss, you're normally supposed to weaken the bots around HYPERIUS to stop them from beaming a shield to HYPERIUS. Once you've weakened the bots, you can then deal damage to HYPERIUS normally. However, the problem with this is that it's actually pretty hard to do this, and for that reason, I would highly recommend you take him on while playing as Zero, and then just trying to bore HYPERIUS instead. This method involves using a Slag Singularity Grenade to properly line up the bots in such a way to where they're properly positioned in front of HYPERIUS. It's kind of hard to explain, and it's best showed in video like I'm doing right now, so if you want to pull this off, I would recommend you get a decent fire weapon that has a reasonably high fire rate and a above average projectile count to make it all a little bit easier. Overall though, HYPERIUS is a great boss to farm, and I'd recommend you do so just so you can get a Norfleet and a Tattler SMG. Hopefully you won't get too many retchers. Number 6. TERRAMORPHOUS. While farming Terra may not be as crucial depending on what character you're playing as, I think it's fair to say that farming TERRAMORPHOUS is still a pretty great idea. Though this boss fight is tough, the goal is to try to keep your back to the wall. That way, if TERRAMORPHOUS tries to melee you and knock you off the map, you'll simply bounce off the wall and be able to get right back into the action. For the easiest time, I'd recommend you play as Salvador, but I've seen pretty much every character take this boss down. So feel free to try your main for farming, and if that doesn't work, you can always just Grog Herald or use the Grog plus Interfacer combo with Salvador to pull off a quick and relatively easy kill on TERRAMORPHOUS. Now, beating TERRAMORPHOUS gives you the chance of getting a lot of TERRAMORPHOUS' specific drops. In particular, the Slayer of TERRAMORPHOUS class mod is really good on Gage, as it boosts pre-shrunk Cyberpunk and by extension, her max Anarchy stack count. There's also the Hide of TERRAMORPHOUS, which is the best Roid Shield in Borderlands 2, and is a perfect choice for Melee 0 players, and maybe even Krieg 2 if you're looking for a Roid Shield. Otherwise, there is a Blood of TERRAMORPHOUS relic, which is nice for its health regen, and you can also get the Pitchfork here as well, which is a pretty decent legendary sniper. In my mind, Terra is a pretty great boss to farm in this game, so be sure to come here if you're looking for some pretty good loot. Number 5. The Ancient Dragons of Destruction. While difficult on most characters, I think you'll agree that the dragons are actually pretty easy, provided you decide to play as Salvador, and you use either the Grog Herald combo or the Grog Interfacer combo. Always aim at the dragons' heads when they land so you can perform criticals, and try to take out the dragons in the order of Helianth, Boost, and then after that you can take out the other two in any order. Just be wary that Incinerator is kind of a pain, as he will close his wings, and you can easily put yourself in fight for life due to all of your bullets being reflected back at you. As far as farming goes, the dragons are good to farm in pretty much any difficulty. In normal mode, the dragons just so happen to be the best source of Eridium in Borderlands 2, as you should be able to easily get around 70 or more Eridium every time you farm the dragons in normal, which should make getting a lot of those more expensive ammo SDUs way easier. Assuming you take on the dragons in Ultimate Vault Hunter mode, you can receive both Seraph Crystals and Eridium, and you can also get some of the dragons' Seraph items. On average, all of these items are pretty good, whether it be the Blockade, which is a shield that possesses some damage resistance, the Stinger, which is basically a more high-end version of the Vlad of Anarchist that can ricochet bullets, and there's also the Omen shotgun, which happens to be a pretty powerful T-door shotgun that fires a series of projectiles in an oscillating circular pattern. Overall, I would say that the dragons are a really great boss to farm in both normal and even in Ultimate Vault Hunter mode. All you have to do is beat the Dragon Keep DLC, and you can farm this boss as much as you want. Number 4. Pyro Pete. Though Pete is no longer the best of the best as far as farmable bosses are concerned, Pyro Pete is still a pretty great boss to farm in this game. This is especially the case if you want Seraph Crystals, as he is currently the easiest of the Seraph Guardians to take on by yourself, regardless of what character you've chosen. All you have to do is just make sure you have either a Trespasser or an Amigo Sincero sniper rifle to bypass his shield, so you can knock off his helmet, and once you've done that, it's just a matter of switching to a decently powerful weapon, and then going to town. Just take care to be near one of the valves when Pete douses the ground with flames, as that way you can simply walk through the water to remove the corrosive and fire status effects that Pyro Pete can inflict on you. Aside from Seraph Crystals, the reason you'd want to come here is for all 3 of Pyro Pete's Seraph items. Pete can drop the O-, which is a pretty decent transfusion grenade, the Big Boom Blaster, which is a really great booster shield that provides grenade and rocket ammo when you pick up the boosters, and you can also receive the Hoplite from Pete as well. It's also worth mentioning that Pyro Pete is a great source of random legendaries and pearlescents. However, it is worth considering that after the Lilith DLC, you're not going to be able to get as high of drop rates on Pete as you will be able to for some of the other Lilith DLC bosses. At this point in the game's lifespan, I would recommend you farm Pyro Pete mainly for the Seraph Crystals he can drop, and also for some of the Seraph gear that he can also drop. So while you can get random legendaries from Pete, I think it's worth mentioning that there are other bosses out there that tend to be better sources. Number 3. Uranus. Uranus is one of the newly added bosses from the Commander Lilith DLC and shares a lot of similarities to Saturn from the vanilla game. In fact, I think you could say that Uranus is essentially a reskin of Saturn and possesses a lot of the same immunities, including slag and critical hit immunity. Uranus also appears to have some splash damage immunity as well, meaning that grenades are probably not going to be a particularly great choice when taking him on. For this boss, I usually like to use Salvador with a Grog Herald combo, or use any other character and swap between the Flacker and Ahab. Both weapon combos should work pretty well in taking down Uranus as fast as possible, and if you do get in trouble for some reason, you can always shoot the turrets on Uranus's legs and shoulders for a easy second wind. As far as farming goes, Uranus has a very high chance of dropping legendaries regardless of the difficulty you're playing. Obviously, Ultimate Vault Hunter mode and the OP levels yield the best loot, as you can get legendaries and pearlescents to drop. However, the legendary drop rate in normal mode is pretty high as well. Just keep in mind that the legendaries you'll receive will be random, and the only real designated drop that Uranus has is the Electric Chair Grenade, which is essentially a souped-up Stormfront, so that might be something worth seeking out if you want a better version of the Stormfront. In the end, while I would say Uranus is kind of hard, it's a great boss to farm, and all you need to do is make sure you've completed the Shooting the Moon quest in the Lilith DLC, and then you should be able to farm him repeatedly. Number 2. Cassius. So, Cassius is the other of 2 newly added main bosses in the Commander Lilith DLC, and unlike Uranus, who is probably the more difficult boss to get to and actually farm, Cassius, on the other hand, is a bit weaker and easier to get to, as you don't have to go through hordes of enemies, and you also don't have to deal with that elevator area in Helios Fallen, which can be kind of a pain in the butt. Like Uranus bot, Cassius has a very high drop rate for legendaries, essentially to the point where they're virtually guaranteed to drop in Ultimate Vault Hunter mode, while also having a very high probability of dropping in normal mode as well. As mentioned when discussing Uranus, farming Cassius in higher difficulties makes the most sense, since the loot quality overall is better, and you can also get pearlescents to drop. When it comes to designated drops, CASSIUS drops the anti-infection, which is probably best described as a souped-up fire bee. Honestly, I think the anti-infection is pretty good, and is at least worth taking the time to farm if you're looking for a reasonably powerful fire grenade. Ultimately, CASSIUS is probably the easier of the two main story bosses that you can repeatedly farm in the Lilith DLC, so I've decided to rank him higher than URANUS. But now for our final entry, and to likely no one's surprise, number 1, HADERAX. Of all of the bosses currently in Borderlands 2, I'd have to say that HADERAX is the best one to farm. This is because the chests that spawn after defeating HADERAX will always spawn at least a few Legendaries, regardless of the difficulty that you defeat the boss in. Additionally, and like the other Lilith DLC bosses, HADERAX also has the benefit of having a high probability of dropping Legendaries in normal, and essentially a guaranteed chance to drop them in Ultimate Vaultator mode. So if you plan on doing any Legendary farming, taking on HADERAX is generally a pretty good idea, and offers the highest potential yield. There's also HADERAX's selection of rainbow gear as well. Upon opening the chests and defeating the boss, the player is guaranteed to get an easy mode shield, along with the chance of getting a peak opener assault rifle and or a hard carry relic. All three of these items are pretty great and will work wonderfully if you decide to do any destruct peak runs. As for taking this boss on, I'd recommend you do it with Salvador, and be sure to equip a grog nozzle and a conference call, as the conference call is usually a great choice up against anything that's really big, and just so happens to work fairly well against HADERAX. Just be sure to aim at the small open spot that's part of HADERAX's mouth, as this is usually the best place to attack. If you deal enough damage, sometimes you can get HADERAX to lean over, exposing the vulnerable part inside of its mouth, which you can then shoot and then basically end the fight. At the end of the day, this is the best boss to farm in Borderlands 2, so be sure to come here if you're looking for Legendaries. Alright guys, thank you all for watching, and I think that's going to wrap up this particular video. If you enjoyed this video, definitely be sure to leave a like, click the bell so you can be notified when I upload my next Borderlands video, and as always, and again, thank you all so much for supporting this channel. Take care, and I'll see you all in the next one.